Welcome to the Middlesex Moments radio show. I'm Dr. Anna Wasesha, the president of Middlesex Community College, and joining me today is John Hall. Now, many of you probably already know John Hall because he's been in Middletown for a long time, right? When did you arrive here?
1990.
And where were you before?
I was in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where you grew up?
No, I grew up in Ohio, and I had served 3 churches, one in Massachusetts on Cape Cod, and then in eastern Pennsylvania, and then I came here to Middletown in 1990.
And it was which denomination?
United Church of Christ.
Right. But we also, you attended Carleton College,
That's
right?
right.
So you spent a little bit of time in Minnesota.
That's right. We have that little
we have
bit
a bond
of,
over
sort of
that.
a Minnesota bond there.
That's right, which I love to find. There's so many people who have relationships with places where I used to live, and I really identified myself as a Midwesterner, so I'm going through an identity crisis, right?
Yeah.
I have to shift to a new way of thinking. I was talking with Phil Miller earlier today. He was in the St. Louis area in 1963 and 64, 65, in the middle of the 60s. The St. Louis Cardinals won the World Series that year, that he was there one of those years. But he also saw the Beatles in Busch Stadium, and I did too.
Oh my goodness.
It was a packed stadium, and we were both there.
You were
now
part
our
of history.
paths cross.
Yeah.
I know. It's fantastic. So, let's. So you spent a long period of time here in Middletown in a pastoral role,
Right.
but now you've shifted. So let's talk about
Right.
the Jonah Center. I want to hear all
Okay.
about that.
Well, the Jonas Center is a nonprofit that actually kind of sprang out of the church in 2004, and then it quickly became separate but with a relationship to the church. We started out to redevelop this interesting part of Middletown we call the North End Peninsula, where the transfer station and the landfill are, and we wanted to transform that into an eco park. We were going to mine the landfill for methane. We had an idea for gasifying wood chips and producing electricity and putting trails there and a boat launch. And it's a very ambitious vision. We ran into a lot of political and, say, operational obstacles to doing that. And so we branched out and started working on other issues in Middletown, the Coggeshall River corridor in general, and started, playing a role in advocating for low-impact design in various public works projects, and became involved in energy efficiency movement, both for the city of Middletown and in residential. And we have paddles out into the floating meadows out there a couple times every summer. We're concerned about the water chestnuts out there. We're going to go and look for those and pull those up next spring.
Is that an invasive?
Yeah, it's a very dangerous, harmful, invasive plant that has been spotted up there. But it was very damaging up the Hockenham River in Hartford, and they pulled tons and tons of it out there. So we want to nip it in the bud, so literally,
Right.
down here.
Right.
So we've been involved in all kinds of things, but now we're advocating. Well, our boat launch is moving along, and we got a federal grant for that back in 2007. We're actually hopeful we could actually construct that this summer in 2012. And
it's a launch where? It's
on
the
the
Connecticut
Coggeshall River,
Coggeshall.
right by the landfill, right in our original home territory there. That's been very complicated to site that, and of course the regulations with the shoreline and everything are, very difficult to get around or get through. But that seems to, we've passed the biggest hurdles on that, and now we're the project advocate for a bikeway in Middletown. There's a $800,000 federal grant that is available to the city. The city's applying, and last night we got approval from the city council, the common council, to appropriate eventually the $200,000 match. So it'll be $1 million project. We're sort of organizing the community for input on that. It's going to be a very, very interesting and exciting project.
Boy, I want to hear a lot more about that. But we have to take a break, and when we come back, let's talk about complete streets and the safety of bicyclists. Well, this is Anna Wasesha from Middlesex Community College, and we're back today talking with John Hall. And when we left off, he was talking about a bicycle path project that the city of Middletown is probably going to
well,
undertake.
we should probably call it a multi-use trail, because it's really going to be for pedestrians and rollerbladers and people who want to bike off-street. And we've discovered there's quite a difference of opinion, or a range of cyclists in Middletown. And we, long term, we want to make the Middletown streets accessible and safer for bicyclists who ride on the streets,
Right.
and make those safer. But then there are also families and people who maybe, are just don't want to be on the street at all. So this would be, about an 8-foot path that's going to go about 3.5 miles from basically near Mercy School in the Wesleyan Hills area down through Long Hill Road, Long Lane, kind of skirt around Wesleyan campus and come out on Washington Terrace and go downtown, and then there'd be bike racks down there. It would be very visible to people coming into Middletown. I think it'll be a very nice attraction and amenity to the city.
It sounds fantastic. So is there open space or that is available where you can develop it into an 8-foot
Well, the
wide?
city has right-of-way along the streets, and we don't want to necessarily be in that right-of-way because we want to go behind the trees and have to minimize the taking down the trees. But the city owns a fair amount of property along this route, and Wesleyan owns a lot of property, and they've really invited us to go right through the campus and not be on the street to accommodate their needs, and also it just makes more sense to go off like behind Freeman Athletic Center rather than stay on Cross Street there. And there are some places where it's easier than others, but it's a very interesting route, and it's just a first step in really connecting all the parts of Middletown, especially the high residential areas with the downtown. That's really the goal. So we're taking this path from a place where there's a high density of residential and going right downtown. It's going to be really, the details have yet to be worked out, but it's going to be a really exciting project.
Right. Yeah, there will be a lot of details. So I would mention safe streets, but then safe streets is this concept that the byways are welcoming to people who need to use them, the ones on wheeled conveyances from skateboards to bikes to whatever to cars, also pedestrians. I will say, I don't think the streets in Connecticut are safe. I mean, I was driving home last night in the dark thinking, as I saw a runner coming up, fortunately she was running on the lane facing me, which, I remember learning that when I was a kid. You're supposed to run against the traffic or ride against the traffic. And fortunately she had the vest with, I think that's Scotch-Lite, the old reflector tape, without which she would have been, she couldn't possibly have hoped to get home safely. And there are so few sidewalks. That's the thing that really stands out.
In the conversation, we had a public meeting about this, and then in various private conversations, I've really heard a lot about how people walk to the Stop and Shop, in that neighborhood, and there aren't any decent sidewalks in that area. It's very dangerous, and we have a lot of improvement to make the streets safer, even for pedestrians.
Right.
I mean, imagine putting in a road and no sidewalk right where there's a supermarket.
Yeah.
Well, what are we thinking?
Right. Right. So city planners have got to get involved with that kind of thing. But it really does. I mean, it's one of the elements that are ingredients of the high quality of life that everybody would like to have. There's also a very interesting article in the Hartford Current yesterday about the number of parking spaces in the city of Hartford and how you may have read it, how it's multiplied, sort of geometrically. And what that's done is, and that's kind of sucked the energy, the kind of hustle and bustle of pedestrian and multimodal, all this other kind of concourse that you really need in a city to make it alive, to replace it with storage space for cars, inanimate objects that sit there for 8 hours
so much parking, there's nothing left for anybody to want to go there.
I know. It's pretty interesting. The old saw, history is doomed to relive it if you don't learn from it. I mean, urban design and urban projects. I grew up in St. Louis, which is the home to Pruitt-Igoe. Chicago had the Cabrini Greens. The idea of building these large-scale ghettos for low-income people was salvation, to bring them from the rural, probably in Ohio too, to get people from the country to move to the city and into public housing, and very dense housing turned out not to be a very good idea at all.
Bicycling offers really a lot in terms of public transportation too, not just when you're riding the bike, but you need to ride the bike to get to the bus stop. And then you need to put the bike on the bus.
On the front
and
of the
then
bus.
You need the bike when you get to Hartford or wherever you're going on the bus, because the bus isn't going to take you exactly where you need to go. So the connection between bikeways or bike paths, bike friendly streets, and public transportation is really key to reducing the volume of traffic going into Hartford and
Right.
and all that parking that's needed that destroys the city, as you said.
Right. I was just in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago, and when you get off the metro station near the Capitol, there's this really very cool, very large, what looks like a bus stop, but it's not. It's really kind of a plexiglass bike helmet within which there are these hundreds of bikes. And so you get off the metro and you go in and you rent a bike. There's this rent-a-bike thing going on there. So you put your credit card in, you get the bike, and then you can take it to any one of, you have to have stopping stations all around, put it back in, put your card in, you've finished, you've rented it. I know.
Yeah.
I know.
So cool.
The creativity out there is fantastic. And fortunately, we're going to live to see a lot of this stuff happen, right?
Right.
So,
we're on the way.
yeah. So I want to know about the Floating Meadow. It sounds like something out of Japanese poetry. So the floating, what is that?
That's an incredible wilderness area of Middletown that I didn't even know about until I lived here for close to 10 years. Out between Middletown, between the North End and Cromwell, east of Newfield Street, between Newfield Street and the river, is this incredible freshwater tidal marshland. Hundreds of acres. It's filled with hawks and egrets, and it's a very, there's a great fish population out there. It's beautiful. You feel like you're miles and miles away from any urban area. And it's an endangered area because the rivers coming into it are very impaired. Fortunately, this marshland cleans up those rivers to a large extent, but we can't expect it to do that ecological service, to an infinite degree. And so that area is a prime area of the Jonas Center's mission, and our goal is to get the public aware of it, to get them out using it to build political support to protect it, because all the businesses around, especially on Newfield Street, they're always wanting to push back and get a little bit more land, and they get closer and closer to those meadows. In some cases they fill in surreptitiously and then it's too late, or they dump stuff back there just to avoid the disposal costs. So there's a lot of things to keep track of out there and keep an eye on, and that's what we're trying to do. But it's a big, precious area. Everybody should get a canoe or a kayak and get out there. In the summer, in June, we'll be taking a group out there. We have about 60 people who go out with us in the summer on those paddles. It's a great joy to be out there with so many people.
Yeah, and of course non-motorized non-motorized boats, right? That's what you're talking about with.
Well, that's what we do. But
are there motorized boats?
Boats are allowed up there. There's a 5 mile per hour speed limit, which unfortunately isn't always observed. The speed limit sign is very small. That's one of the things we'd like to see is a more prominent speed limit sign. And some of those fishing boats zip through there as if no one would be there, but. No, motorboats are allowed up there, and there's a fair amount of fishing up there.
What kind of fish?
Well, I'm not a fishing expert, but I think there might be northern pike up there, pickerel. I'm not sure. I'm not an ichthyologist.
Yeah, right. But coming from Minnesota, of course, I have to say it's pretty much in my blood. Although, I mean, and this ties in directly with what you're working on. It's so sad. The Minnesota State Fair is the great state fair, right? And there's the Department of Natural Resources building has this tremendously large pool with all the fish that you can catch there. But they pass out to you, first of all, readings on the lakes that you might frequent that give you mercury and concentration and other things. And there are all these warnings about pregnant women shouldn't eat fish.
Yeah.
Maybe once a week, maybe once a month, maybe try to avoid it altogether. Small children, anybody who's, kind of a low body weight.
Right.
Because of the issue of your body processing those carcinogens and mercury, And so even though it might look beautiful, as you start to open up Pandora's box, you find out all the things that have happened.
A constant diet of the fish you catch anywhere in Connecticut, for that matter. I mean,
all
the coal power plants in the Midwest.
Right.
Put all that mercury up, it comes down here. I mean, we have our own power plants too, but not so much coal.
Right. Well, and I think all the stuff that is being lofted into the air in China, where they open a coal-fired plant every week, is making its way here too. But we have to take another break, and we will come back and we'll continue to talk about the environment. Welcome back. And today with me is John Hall. We've been talking about the environment and lakes and waters and bikes and all those wonderful things that we think about as the outdoor space. Here at Middlesex Community College, we have a strategic plan, and one of the elements of that plan is sustainability, writ large, sustainability infused in the curriculum, sustainability in the way that we operate our physical plant, sustainability in terms of the way that those of us who are the faculty and staff, the workers here, need to model sustainable practices because we want to transfer that to the next generation. Some of our next generation on this campus can be our age or older. I mean, because we have this whole variety of students. Mm-hmm. But I think probably any single person that we help to kind of modify their behaviors to think about sustainability principles, which I assume you use kind of the same. Well, tell me which one that was. There's a sort of definition of sustainability that comes from a conference. It starts with a B, and it's the definition is that you want to use the resources you have available today in such a way that in the next generation of citizens, people on the planet will have the same rich array of resources at their disposal when they're living their lives on the earth. And I can't remember the Bertland, something like that.
Doesn't ring a bell.
And actually, there's a new climate conference, right? Starting in South Africa.
Durban, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Are you watching that from a distance?
I haven't paid too much attention to it, but the global political community is having a hard time accomplishing anything in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Actually, one of the most promising things Obama recently did, he hasn't done that much with climate, but the new fuel efficiency standards are going to make a big difference, because probably maybe as much as 2/3 of our emissions come from transportation. So there's a huge amount to gain there. But getting back to this term sustainability, one of the things I always bring up in connection with that is the question, what are we trying to sustain? And when you start talking about that, you realize people have different ideas about what sustainability refers to. Are we trying to sustain our standard of living? Right? Some people would say, yeah. Are we trying to sustain, economic growth? And whatever your answer to that is going to determine the kind of compromises or sacrifices you're willing to make. And I don't think there's any such thing as human sustainability. Actually, I've come to the conclusion that humans are an incredible invasive species. I mean, we're highly successful as animals on the planet. We leave a huge footprint, and there's no way around that. That's just our success as biological entities. But we should talk in terms of being more or less sustainable. Barry Chernoff at Wesleyan, that I've worked with a lot, said one time, I hate to quote him on this because I haven't really asked him if this is literally true, but he said one time in a conversation, there's only one small group of humans that have ever lived sustainably, and that was a little nomadic tribe in Africa that moved around enough that they didn't destroy the environment. Every other human community has basically destroyed the environment, and so there's really no such thing as sustainability, or it's very rare, or at least with our industrial civilization, it's not achievable anymore with the population we have on the earth. And when I give little talks on this, I like to show the population graph of the graph of world population in history, and how it's a flat line with a little dip for the bubonic plague,
the Middle Ages, right?
And then it just makes a right angle turn and shoots straight up, and now we're just about 7 billion. And is that line going to continue going up? And I don't see how it can just keep going up. It can't go up forever. It's going to have to come down. And what is the world going to look like when that starts coming down? Is it going to come down because of disease? Is it going to come down because of war? we're using all these antibiotics in our food production. Is that going to hit us with a pestilence? Are we going to run into an energy wall?
Mm-hmm.
And our food production is very dependent on gobs of fossil fuel, and when that becomes more expensive, who's going to get food and who isn't? We have huge challenges ahead. It's daunting to think about it.
It is. I'm pausing, thinking about it. Let me tell you. One of the things that I've worked on a lot in the last, decade or so of my life is I started with community gardening and got to urban agriculture and went from that to sustainable food production. And people often will invoke the farmers before, the farmers who farmed before World War II, because after World War II there were all these chemicals that had been developed as a part of the defense industry, right, as a way to launch a better war, and they needed to find some other conduit for them to be sold, which gets you to the capitalist market economy. Your question, do we want to live the same quality of life with the same kinds of consumer pleasures that we have in this country? And so, and extension agents were part of this, and the extension is a very important part of every state university system, the ones that serve that role. But they were, instruments in making sure that people knew that they could have reliable harvests if they used these days Roundup Ready seeds and genetically modified seeds, and that they would escape, the horror and destruction of the Depression era and the Dust Bowl, when the farming communities not only couldn't rely on reliable harvests, but saw the things that they would sow in the spring, eaten up by plagues of grasshoppers and things like that. In my own family, that happened, and those are the kinds of stories that become the lore, that get repeated over and over again, that then instill people to take a life stance. And so for many farmers in America whose, grandparents experienced that firsthand, they were like, they want to do industrial agriculture because you don't ever, ever, ever want to spend your life putting everything you own on the line in the spring when you plant the fields and then losing it all by the end of the summer.
You're a Midwesterner. We've both been in Minnesota,
Yeah.
and when you drive out there now, and I've been going out to the Midwest my whole life because my parents are from Minnesota, what struck me is how dense those cornfields are. They grow, it seems like 2 or 3 times as much corn as they used to.
do.
And the soybeans, it's totally uniform in height. It's extremely dense, and of course, there's a lot of irrigation. There's a lot of petrochemicals, and can we continue to increase crop yields indefinitely?
Right.
I don't see how it can just keep going up.
Right.
It's the changes that have happened in our lifetime are enormous, and they just seem to be accelerating.
Right. It's monocropping there, and there are some things, unintended consequences. One of the theories, not to be proven yet, but maybe will be proven, just like whether or not you get cancer from using your cell phone. The jury's still out on these things. Is that the reason we're getting so much rain in the Midwest is because the corn respires moisture into the air, and it has to go somewhere. And when you have thousands and thousands and thousands of square miles of corn, you've got a lot more kind of moisture that has to go somewhere, and it goes up into the clouds and turns around and it becomes rain. Mix in a little bit of wind, you become a new tornado alley.
The aquifer out there is going down fast. More water is being used than is being replenished, and so when that big aquifer out in the Midwest dries up, where are we going to be? These are scary thoughts.
I know. Well, all the more reason to be a sponge to learn the science that underlies all of these things, and to read the articles and journals and go to the documentaries and have conversations with your friends about it. I think to go back to food quickly, when we go to the grocery store and we buy food, we're making an environmental choice.
Absolutely.
And I just hope that we all start, continue to think about it, because I personally want to do what I can to make sure that perhaps it's more sustainable, not just sustainable, that there's a more sustainable world for our children and grandchildren, and then the thousands of years hence. Yeah, we won't live to see that, but that thousands of years hence. I kind of wish I could, just to see how it works out. This has been a lot of fun talking with you today. I hope you'll come back. We'll talk about it some more.
I love doing this with you, Anna. Anytime you want to talk.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. So let's see. I want to close this radio program today by saying that if you're interested in the college, we have a website, and you can get it at mxcc.comnet, COMMNET.edu. I'm Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, wishing you a good day.